Welcome to the Reason Roundtable, your weekly blast of libertarian air conditioning into the sweltering statist hell broth of American politics. I did it, Catherine. I did it. Mm-hmm. I am Matt Welch, joined by Nick Gillespie, Peter Suderman, and Katherine Mangu-Ward. Happy post-Freedom Fest, gang.
Howdy.
Hey, Matt. Hey, Matt.
Happy Monday.
I got a double hey, Matt. How's the...
Yeah, hey, Matt.
Hey, Matt.
Hey,
You're
hey,
like the
Matt.
Raj
of
what's happening. You are Raj, and I am merely Re-Raj.
Chain of fools.
You've broken the rules already. How's the Freedom Fest hangover, everyone?
It's great.
Feels like...
Smells like napalm. Feels like victory.
Catherine?
Oh, I didn't go, so I'm fit as a fiddle.
That's very good. All right. Gave you a chance and you took it. So let's go on to the podcast that we record every week. Do you ever out there in listener land notice an unusual word like perambulate or something, and then suddenly you hear it everywhere? People can't stop saying it. That's kind of what happened to at least me over the last 3 weeks, and it's really all about me with the word Bidenomics. Nomics. President Joseph Robinette Biden II has tweeted that phrase a half dozen times over the last 3 or 4 days, including such classics as, Bidenomics means we're making things here in America again, shipping the products overseas rather than shipping the jobs overseas. It's really good writing over there. And Catherine's personal favorite, over 13.2 million jobs created. That's Bidenomics. The president has given multiple speeches, and the White House has sent out never-ending fact sheets on that term. I'll just read the headline of one of the dozens of search results over at whitehouse.gov. Bidenomics is working. The president's plan grows the economy from the middle out and bottom up, not the top down. It's like what his old man used to say. People don't want a hand out, they want a hand up. Peter, this is essentially a pre-election year branding exercise and attempted victory lap. And I say attempted because even though the United States growth rate, unemployment rate, and inflation rate are basically the best in the G7 group of rich industrialized countries, we're still getting news stories like this from Reuters last week. Biden's public approval rating held steady at 40% in early July, close to the lowest levels of his presidency, as economic worries continue to trouble Americans, according to a Reuters Ipsos poll this week. In that poll, the economy ranked as the number one worry among voters. Reason magazine, website, and etc. has, of course, cast a more skeptical eye on both the economic policy and marketing, with Veronique Derougy last week writing, Bidenomics is nothing new. It's a familiar program, and it will result in higher prices, slower growth, and fewer jobs. And when this rollout first began, our very own Peter Suderman wrote a piece under the headline, Turns out Bidenomics means top-down economic control. Peter, what do you mean by top-down control? And do we know enough about the effects of said top-downonomics to assess whether it has been working or not as advertised?
I think the best way to understand Biden's Bidenomics push is to think about Denny's for a moment. Denny's, yes, the diner Denny's where you can drink coffee and have pancakes and scrambled eggs that may or may not be made from a powder. Delicious Denny's that we all know. Because for a long time, Denny's slogan was a good place to sit and eat. A good place. I'm not making this up. They had it on billboards all over the country. A good place to sit and eat. And this is Bidenomics, from the top down and the middle up, from the bottom down, whatever, the middle out and the bottom up, or not the top down. That's a good place to sit and eat for presidenting, for the Biden campaign for 2024, for the economy, right? It's just like, yeah, it's a good thing that you like to do with the thing that we do here. It's just a marketing slogan. That's all it is. Like the best way the thing to understand here is that just a couple of days before this speech, the initial Bidenomics speech in which Biden claimed the mantle of Bidenomics for himself came out, there was a big sort of press release thing that came out from the White House, and it wasn't written by the economic team. It was written by a couple of political messaging experts who are known for like phrase coinage and that sort of thing. And it is like that is what Biden is trying to do here, is he is trying to say, hey, actually the economy is good. And also, and in the process of doing that, he's trying to say, and vote for me, not Trump, because Trump's, like, to the extent that Trump is going to make a policy argument, it's going to be the economy is bad because of Biden. So this is almost entirely a messaging campaign from someone who is trying to take away an argument that he thinks, that he and his team think are going to be used against him in 2024. But if you listen to the policy substance, the other thing that really sort of stands out here is, you know, the underlying phrase that you quoted us, the bottom out in the middle of but not the top down. It is top down. This is the other thing here is almost everything that Biden is pitching as part of Bidenomics. None of it is new, but it is this sort of litany of things he has done over the last couple of years since becoming president. And it is all top-down stuff, a huge amount of spending, industrial policy, and it's stuff that has given us persistent inflation over the last couple of years, to the point where, according to Moody's last month, inflation has added about $768 to the average American's household monthly budget. That's actually quite a bit, especially if you are on a relatively low income. You've got all of these problems with the industrial policy rollout, all of these, you know, big subsidy plans where we're going to build where Biden is going to subsidize factory construction, except those factories are way over budget. They're not finished. You know, they're just beginning to roll this stuff out. Even like the chip subsidies, the people who make those chips are saying like, yeah, this is not going to work. I mean, give us the money, but this is not going to work. This is going to be hugely expensive. And so this is a message. This is a campaign marketing scheme in which Biden is basically bragging about top-down economic controls and trying to convince people that they're good.
Nick, on Sunday, the president tweeted out, right now, real wages for the average American worker is higher than it was before the pandemic, with lower wage workers seeing the largest gains. That's Bidenomics. What happened next, Nick?
Yeah, that's also kind of malarkey to go back to. I wish you would keep with the malarkey, the
malarkey eradication campaign.
Yeah, or just the malarkey branding. I like that as a slogan. Or if he was going to do something, Matt, named after himself, you are the last person who calls him by his middle name, but Robonomics, I think sounds pretty good.
Yes.
You know, rob, you're going to rob from the rich, give to the poor. You know, you could do a whole Robin Hood campaign. Among other things, average real wages went up for the first couple of months of the lockdowns because we poured so much money into the economy and things like that. So, one of the problems for people who care about reality, but actually I think Biden might benefit from this, is that people are not benchmarking stuff necessarily from where it was 10 or 20 years ago, but from the worst parts of their recent memory. And so, people are doing better than they were a year ago. Inflation is down from 9% to closer to 3%. So in that sense, it makes sense that Biden is starting to talk about the economy and it kind of roaring back like a cat that is on one of those things where it can't walk anymore. So it's in one of those wheel, the rickshaws or something like that. But I think for, the biggest thing to think about here is, those approval ratings that he has the lowest approval rating at this point in his presidency since anyone going back to Jimmy Carter, which tells you a lot. And it's the same as Donald Trump's was at this point. And Trump was dealing with a pandemic. So it's not good. By the same token, everything can change. I was looking at the comparative approval ratings. And if you look at Ronald Reagan at this point in his presidency, he was almost below Biden, and then it shot up. If you look at George H.W. Bush, he was at something, he was close to 90%, and did not get reelected. So all of this kind of stuff is still shadow boxing until we get closer to the election. But I think, to go to Peter's point, the reality is that our economy is in a funk, and it has been in one for most of the 21st century. And nothing that Biden is doing is actually altering that. And I think you see here, and this also helps to explain why RFK, and when RFK finally, goes below 10% and becomes less interesting to people, somebody else will come up. But why people are desperate to find something new, somebody new and different to talk about, is that we have been stuck in a rut for basically certainly all of the past 5 or 6 years, but really most of this century. And nobody, from the Democrats or the Republicans are offering any kind of alternative. So Biden may well win re-election, but he will not fix anything.
It is true that wages have caught up with inflation very recently, but that's a very recent phenomenon. And prices have been rising this whole time. As I said, budgets are the inflation has added a lot to the average American's budget. And so, this sort of relatively recent trend, I think, is not necessarily indicative of the sense of what the Biden's economy has actually been like over the last couple of years.
But it might pick up, because if it continues to go up, the labor force participation rate is creeping back up to where it was pre-pandemic, whatever that means. But I think when you go bigger, nobody feels like it's morning again, right? And maybe that will kick in, if there's 4 or 5 months of staying in place as opposed to another catastrophe or something like that.
We'll just add to the RFK discourse. Everyone likes to talk about him because of, the New York Post has great articles about people farting and whatnot.
Yeah. But those farts would not hurt Jews or Asians. That would not affect them as bad as the rest of them.
This podcast stinks.
I'm just going to invite people to Google that and move on to the next thing that people don't pay attention to is Marianne Williamson. Here's an idea, Peter.
Yeah, look at him. He's laughing at love because he has a barren
Here's an
heart.
Idea, Peter.
Unlike you and me,
don't
we're filled
break
with
out
love.
in laughter at the moderator making a point. How's that? No, just to say that Marianne Williamson never polled more than about 1%, usually much less last time around. She's polling at 6% this time. This is not an indication of special 6 times as strong Marianne Williamson messaging. It's an indication that Democratic voters want someone who's not named Joe Biden for a reason. And that might explain RFK's support as well. Katherine, you're a big thanks, I hate it gal. I'd love you to give me a reaction to literally the first 3 headlines that popped up on my Google News search at 10:20 this morning. You ready?
Okay.
MSNBC's Ari Velshi, for fact's sake, Bidenomics is working, especially in red states. The Hill, Bidenomics is an insult to millions of voters living paycheck to paycheck. And the Wall Street Journal, Bidenomics and the boom in DEI and ESG jobs. Your reaction?
That's it. That's what I have. Just that sound. Yeah. I mean, this absolutely validates Peter's thesis that the concept of Bidenomics, the word Bidenomics, is just a thing for people to yell or yell about. So Biden can be like, Bidenomics, that's what that is when good things happen. And everyone else can be like, Bidenomics, that's what that is when bad things happen. It's basically just rebranding Thanks Obama, but as an actual official presidential slogan, I guess. The speech that he gave in Chicago was such a classic Biden speech in that, first of all, the man could not hold on to words. He struggled so hard for the word concentration. He went with consecrated. He went with a word that wasn't even a word. It was concertated or something. It was covfefe
That's what happens
levels.
when you see a symphony at the Lincoln Center.
It was covfefe levels of speech, and everyone's just like, yeah, that's how he talks. But the tidbit of that speech that caught my attention, which is part and parcel with these headlines, is he just said, Bidenomics is working. When I took office, the pandemic was raging and our economy was reeling. And it's like, yes, that's the whole thing. If you start your graph from the darkest moment in recent history, then a bunch of the lines trend upward. Unfortunately, also spending lines and other things like that. But that doesn't mean you're doing a good job as president. And I think just at the most fundamental level, saying we have somewhat recovered from the pandemic is not like the biggest endorsement of a presidency.
Peter, to what extent in the top down, in the industrial policy, in the, protecting American jobs and not shipping jobs overseas, I mean, you posited this as Biden playing some kind of preemptive prevent defense over a presumed Trump attack. But to what extent is Bidenomics Trumponomics? It feels like on some pretty large areas that it's, or who's laughing at me now? I can't see the screen.
I am. Okay, no, I'm chuckling. I'm chortling in
solidarity,
kind of acknowledgement of that's a wise way of thinking about it.
I'm looking forward to more people in the Sohrab Ahmari camp saying that actually Biden is the real Trump. But to your point of view, your vantage point, Peter, how much of it is similar?
So if you guys remember the 2015 presidential campaign, 2016 when Trump was first running, and then when he became president, he talked a lot about bringing back or holding on to factory jobs. And I mean, to the extent that he had a clear economic policy argument, that was a big part of it. And that meant something, maybe some tariffs, maybe some trade stuff, maybe some subsidies. It wasn't totally clear what it actually meant under Trump. But, if you recall, around the time he became president, there were a couple of factories that he sort of jawboned into not closing and keeping open. And he was like, yeah, that's because I'm president, because that's the power of Trump. Well, Biden has taken a lot of those ideas and operationalized them at a much more sort of industrial level, right? It's like let's do that, but actually for real and big time. And he has started calling what he is doing, he has called it industrial policy and is trying to rehabilitate that term. Industrial policy, of course, just means subsidies and regulations and rules that pick winners and losers in the economy. We can talk all day here about the Jones Act. We won't, but one way of thinking about about industrial policy is the Jones Act, but for everything, right? And so a big thing that Joe Biden has done is he has funded a bunch of factory projects, green energy, EVs, semiconductors. And those semiconductor plants are a particularly good case study because we're spending billions and billions of dollars on these things, but we don't have the workers for them. The costs are way too high, right? Even the people, like I said, the guy who founded the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, which is one of the biggest semiconductor companies in the world, has called Biden's efforts to make America a home for this stuff an expensive exercise in futility. Biden also in that speech talked about a figure that he has mentioned a figure that he has said in many of his speeches, which is that when these chip plants open, they are going to provide jobs for Americans without college degrees so that those Americans can make an average of $100,000 to $130,000. That sounds pretty great. But if you look at what an official, not like a conservative think tank working on the outside, an actual Biden administration official just told Time magazine recently, well, it doesn't mean that every job is going to pay six figures. When you aggregate all the jobs, the 4-year degree jobs, the 2-year jobs, the training certificates, you'll get a number like 135,000. But of course, it's a mix. And of course, what it actually turns out is the people without college degrees are going to end up in these training courses, and then that they'll pay a bunch for, and then they're going to end up making more like $43,000, and that's after they go through these training courses. So there's a whole bunch of really nonsensy statistics that go into this. And then, of course, just a huge amount of money. And so there is definitely a lot of overlap between the Trump way of talking about the economy and the Biden way of talking about the economy. It's just that, frankly, Biden's is, I don't want to say better run, but like they've actually taken those ideas and done a bunch of stuff and spent a bunch of money. And so Biden's ends up being much more expensive. And I think the long-term hangover is going to be much worse.
Can I tell a super amazing American story about the invention of the semiconductor?
Yes.
Thank you.
Are you going to talk about William Shockley's racist beliefs?
No, I'm not. So Biden said...
Then I'm going to take a snooze for
Biden said about the jobs moving overseas, I want to remind you, America invented these chips. Now, obviously that caught my ear.
Also true of Flamin' Hot Cheetos.
that caught my ear because America didn't invent shit. So I went and looked up what actually the backstory was, and it's fantastic. So it's 1958, and Jack Kilby, who later wins a Nobel Prize in Physics, is an electronics engineer at Texas Instruments. And the reason that we have the chip, the reason we have the semiconductor is because he was a new employee in July of that year. And he had not accumulated enough vacation time to take any time off. So he was just like all by himself in the Texas Instruments office. And he started like messing around. And he was like, what? Like, why do we need all these wires in these things? And then ... the semiconductor. This is great. Like America's like terrible, super limited vacation policies leading to the invention of the semiconductor. Like,
yeah, you don't invent the semiconductor when you take all of August off.
That is the only way that I will concede that like America invented the semiconductor. But other than that, I think we should give credit to Jack Kilby.
Nick, to cap us off on this, you were talking about public approval ratings of presidents and Reagan and Bush and others.
Which is really all that matters. Whether or not you are loved.
I would argue that windbreakers underneath uniforms in 1970s baseball cards is more important. True. But the mirroring of Biden and Trump is pretty interesting. Their approval ratings track pretty well, just immediately went to around 40% and just stayed there. And there's kind of reason to believe that they might continue. If you looked at Trump's economy, that's Catherine's favorite way of saying these things. In July of 2019, you could make a rosy picture if you so choose, and especially chose to, as Democrats are doing now, to ignore the guillotine above the neck of a lot of future things, Katherine, just long-term spending and debt and entitlements and such. And yet those things persist, the exact kind of mirror dissatisfaction levels and sense of kind of contempt or disagreement, dissatisfaction with presidents. Could it be that we're just in a time now where we have structural disapproval of presidents and a structural like breaking of what used to be the commonly held wisdom that if the economy looks good before an election, presidents always win? Like something in our negative polarization times has broken that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's plausible, Matt. The thing to think about Trump, though, is that under his presidency, the economy kept expanding. And if you go back and you look at the, wages, real wages, they continued to bump up under his presidency, until COVID. And he was one of the things that is different than him and Biden is that he was more of a deregulator, even if he didn't deregulate the way that he was talking about or anything like that. There was a widely held perception, and at lower level agencies, he let things happen more than Biden seems to be. So there was a sense of slow but persistent expansion under Trump that I don't think is happening here. But I think more profoundly, where you're right is there's just a change in kind of like basic politics where you can get reelected president with relatively low approval ratings. You don't have to win in a big landslide, et cetera. Like, our expectations have been managed so downward that I think, people are willing, all Biden has to do is be a little bit better than Trump or RFK or another major party candidate who, like Biden, can't finish a sentence.
All right.
We don't even, and that maybe that's something that goes back to, Bush or something like that, where we no longer, Bush, the older as well as the younger, we don't expect presidents to actually speak in anything approaching declarative sentences anymore.
Well, maybe, Nick Gillespie, that just means...
And maybe it's not a bad thing.
That there's a perfectly teed up segue into maybe having a centrist political party shaking things up and rejecting the polls and the extremes and reaching across the aisle.
I sure
getting
hope
things
so.
done. So today is a very theoretically exciting day for everyone who's ever dreamed of a centrist political party, which I think the people who dream about it most are people who want to be the president of that centrist political party, like Michael Bloomberg and Howard Schultz. I'm sure I'm leaving out several other ones. Today in New Hampshire, in the early presidential primary state of New Hampshire, No Labels, which is a 501c4 that was founded in 2010, ostensibly to look for pragmatic solutions, solve problems at a time when all the passion was flowing to the Tea Party on the right and Occupy Wall Street on the left. They're holding an event there at St. Anselm College. That's a tell. Involving Peter's very favorite Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, a centrist Democrat, plus moderate Republican and both parties' appointed ambassador to various places, John Huntsman, plus the famous independent former Democrat, Vinegar Joe Lieberman, the power troika, the power trio. Biggest power trio since Rush, will be touting their exciting manifesto that they rolled out this weekend called Common Sense, Nick, and they will.
Is that spelled with a K? I hope.
CENTS, and they.
Can you imagine coming up with Common Sense?
I mean,
now without like an airbrush logo or something. What the hell?
I want to be the political consultant that was paid six figures to come up with that one. Like, I got an idea. They will, and already have been, fielding nonstop questions about their potential role in becoming spoilers to Joe Biden's re-coronation. Katherine, these guys just want to solve problems, and they want to talk about the debt, and they want to appoint a blue ribbon commission to solve entitlements. So what's not to like?
I mean, I was actually reading the platform and thinking it is common sense in the sense that when we commonly spend the next several years screaming at each other, this is like roughly what we're going to end up with, right? Like the thing they're describing is, for the most part, the American status quo. And that's because we're 50-50. But I think that there's, they're like crucially wrong about what we will end up with or what we can end up with in so many different areas that it just starts to kind of take on this exercise in futility. I think it's weird. This is the same is true with the LP. That there's always this moment where people are both furious at the thing, the third party thing, the alternative thing, for being totally unmoored from reality and having nothing to do with anything, and also for being spoilers, right? Like both things are not likely to be true. And so I think it's either the case that there genuinely is a huge appetite for the sixth return of John Huntsman. I wouldn't bet money on that, but okay, we'll try. Sure. Let the American people have a say. In which case, if he is a spoiler, then great. The major parties deserve it. Couldn't have happened to two nicer guys. I think far more likely is that this is not going to make any headway. There will be no traction. It will be ignored. And that's fine too. If people want to spend their time and money on this, I just sort of don't understand the very, very strong feelings, especially when the two choices are so bad. It would be one thing if we had the literal second coming of Jesus and the actual devil on the ticket. And I know that there are people who believe that is true, but I personally don't. And I don't think even if that were the case, that the common sense platform powered no labels candidate is going to be the decisive factor.
Peter, you have paid pretty close attention to Joe Manchin over the years, and also to various kind of debt ceiling negotiations, and to the extent of which anyone's even talking about entitlements anymore, except to protect them forever kind of conversations, which doesn't really happen anymore. But do you have any sense about the comparative influence, impact on Washington budget negotiations and just governance reality? Joe Manchin on one hand, and his kind of little narrow power sliver. Man, this podcast.
Power sliver.
And then on the power sliver, let me explain that to you, Katherine.
Thanks.
There's a very narrow majority that the Democrats have, and as such, a individual person, like a sliver in a field of 100.
It's like that sliver of West Virginia between Pennsylvania
will
and
have
Ohio.
extra power because it's such a narrow majority. Anyways, so Joe Manchin on one hand, and then the Problem Solvers Caucus on the other hand, Problem Solvers Caucus has been basically the only thing that No Labels has had to show for its exertions in Washington, D.C., as far as I can tell, over the past 13 or 14 years. Has the Problem Solvers Caucus had some impact that I'm just kind of been sleeping through that is equal or greater than that of Joe Manchin just by virtue of his sliverness?
You are correct that the Problem Solvers Caucus is the best way to view and understand the no labels question, because the Problem Solvers Caucus is this group of kind of centrist-ish lawmakers in Congress whose primary thing is we should do stuff on a bipartisan basis and in a civil manner. And that sounds great. And I think there are, to a lot of people anyway, and I think there are things to be said for bipartisanship, and in particular, even more than that, for like civil politics. The problem with the Problem Solvers Caucus is they have not solved very many problems.
That seems like a thing.
I mean, just in terms of like a legislative record, they have done almost nothing. Whereas Joe Manchin has actually exerted, I think, some positive influence on the Biden administration agenda simply by virtue of being the deciding vote and being somebody who is the most conservative Democrat in the Senate, which means that in a very close vote, he is the one who basically gets to say, this is how it's going to be, and this is what I will vote for or what I won't vote for. And that has had a moderating effect, not always one that brings Biden's agenda into a place where like we like it, but a place where it's less bad, I think, from a libertarian perspective in many, if not all instances. Biden has had a moderating effect, in particular on spending. But you can also think about the emphasis on bipartisanship here is revealing because, as you said, right now the bipartisan consensus is that we shouldn't do anything about entitlements. And so while it is true, I think, that to have a stable reform of entitlements and a stable sort of sense of like what we're going to do about long-term deficit and debt issues, like you're going to need some sort of two-party buy-in for that to last and for that to take hold. Right now, the consensus is actually let's do nothing. And so the emphasis here on, we're going to do civility. Great. Civility is nice. I like it too. And bipartisanship, fine. I think it can be necessary, especially for big contentious issues like entitlements. It's not actually going to get them what they want. And frankly, the bipartisanship has gotten us into a bad place, into the specific bad place that we are in right now. And so I think they would do well to spend much more time not focusing exclusively on process independent of policy outcomes, but instead to focus very specifically on policies that they support. The issue, of course, there is, well, you know, that gets you into contentious places where maybe people aren't going to be so civil. And then what are you going to do if you're the pro-civility group?
Nick, I was startled to discover, I think it was last week, that the eyelidless Richard Gephardt is still alive. Or was it eyebrow?
He has eyelids. I don't think he has eyebrows.
Okay, sorry, I was trying to summon a picture in my mind, and
I'm pretty sure he has a nonprofit committed to fixing that through high fructose corn syrup or some other product coming
ethanol,
out of Missouri
maybe it could be
Iowa.
anything.
Yeah.
So old Dick Gephardt. This is going to launch.
Ragged Dick.
Going to launch.
Magic Dick Gephardt would be. He would be in the White House if he had co-opted the name of the harmonica player from the Jay Giles band.
You're not wrong about that, as per usual.
Thank you.
He has launched a group or that is out there to stop or combat no labels, and I think. I think that you can share my disappointment that they haven't yet.
I hope it's just called labels.
Yeah. Pro labels.
That's great, but also it should be called no labels, and then have
anti labels,
and then have as its theme song the classic Ringo Starr workup of the Hoyt Axton.
No, I just have this vision of Dick Gephardt answering the phone and being like, "No, we don't sell labels." Like we just like just over and over. Yeah. People being like, "Is this Staples? Like, I need some labels."
I also see him like going out onto CNN or something and talking to his press people, and he's got the fake eyebrows that the David Ferry character had in Oliver Stone's JFK. obviously false. And he's like, how do my eyebrows look? And they're like, you look great. You look excellent.
What is there a lesson that you benevolently would like to encourage mainstream Democrats to learn as they gin up an incredible season?
Yeah. Crustable, uncrustable, right? Are
those are the
sandwiches
PB&Js?
with, without the crust.
What's great is that it's
nobody likes.
It's not
crust.
me like reading something. Just my brain went ahead and created that fake word.
You have been sucked into this vortex of not being able to finish a sentence or put words together in a semantic.
Dude,
kind of like myself, right? Now,
pot throwing glass stones at the kettle.
With the sword of Damocles.
I am sorry that I summoned this by talking smack about Joe Biden's inability to finish a sentence. I didn't realize I was here with.
I think maybe we're looking at it wrong. We should be praising anybody who can start a sentence these
Matt,
days.
ask us a question.
It's for Nick. And Nick, what lesson are Democrats not learning? And instead of not learning the lesson, engaging in a entire season of stirring up a hate bath against No Labels and RFK and Marianne Williamson and Cornel West and God knows what else, should they be learning something about the disaffection towards their own policies? And what could they do instead of just calling all these people losers?
Okay, well, one, they're not learning a lesson because the odds are the president is going to be a Democrat next time or a Republican. So they're right to do whatever they can to delegitimate or push away anybody coming in from the margins. So they're playing politics as usual, Matt Welch. And then the lesson I think Americans should be learning, or what I'm starting to hope I learn, I would much rather see the 2024 election or whatever year it's going to take place in. I would love it at this point, while listening to this long conversation, I would love it to be a flat-out national referendum on Ron DeSantis's Florida versus Gavin Newsom's California. Because what we have is a consensus that I think a number of the other participants on this podcast, whose names escape me despite being able to read them on the StreamYard channel and whatnot that we're recording this on. But we have a shitty consensus that we're not going to do anything about cutting spending. We're not going to do anything about changing tax revenue or either getting rid of it or cutting spending or whatever. We just have a very strong consensus for unsustainable, levels of government spending and regulation and interference and dumb foreign policy. We need to have a clear reset, that is not simply Trump versus Biden or something like that. And I think looking somewhat at Florida's, kind of concept of governing under Ron DeSantis and Gavin Newsom, where you have, in California, you have a state that taxes people a hell of a lot and offers at least the hope of high levels of services, which they don't really deliver. And then you have, in Ron DeSantis and Florida, and this is not just these individuals, this is going back about 30 or 40 or even 50 years. You have a state that says we're going to offer generally shitty services and low levels of them, and we're going to tax you less. And I think between that, you're going to find the new consensus, which will actually allow us to get out of this economic and cultural funk, because we'll have a politics which has been settled for the near future in a way that allows people to get on with the rest of their lives, which is where everything is going to happen.
All right. We're going to get to our listener email of the week here in a moment. But first, a reminder that this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Friends, when Guns N' Roses sang Welcome to the Jungle was a metaphor for life itself, which W. Axl Rose warned gets worse here every day. That feeling is real and has happened to all of us. In fact, maybe happening to all of us right now. Professional therapy can be your map through the overgrown and sometimes hostile seeming terrain all around you, helping you hack your way through dense moments and into the clearing. It can get better. BetterHelp Online Therapy is an easy-to-use, super flexible, entirely online therapy service that has helped many listeners of this very podcast. All you have to do is fill out a quick questionnaire, get matched with a therapist, and if you don't like the first one, you just swap them out for a second. Let therapy be your map through the jungle, and maybe even start the road to Paradise City with BetterHelp. Just visit betterhelp.com/roundtable right now to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/roundtable. Do it today. You'll be glad you did. Okay, reminder to email your short queries. And can I please reemphasize that more? Yes, short. If it's long, I can't read it because it's long. It's like a long intro, like the one I had at the top of this podcast. No one wants to hear all that. This one, email them to roundtable@reason.com. This one comes from Dustin James Harper. Great cowboy name. Dear experts of the Reason Roundtable, I'm going to cut in here. We're not experts, specialists. In our pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, how should we define liberty? Would you agree or disagree with the following statement? The single mother who has to choose between health care for herself or putting food on the table for her child doesn't have as much liberty as the wealthy son of a wealthy business owner. In this situation, does the government have any responsibility to ensure the liberty of the single mom? Since I kind of heard somewhere in there invoked a reference to the Declaration of Independence, how libertarian politics can fix what's wrong with America. Nick, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I do, actually. I think that it is worth thinking about liberty, not simply in the traditional negative liberty way, meaning being left alone. But if people don't have any chance of participating in society, they are not going to be able to, and they're not free, and nor are we free. I don't think the government has to give everybody that hand up or hand out or anything like that. But Friedrich Hayek talked about being able to participate in society through basic things like subsistence, welfare, public education, and things like that. Milton Friedman talked about that. In that particular instance, I'm not exactly sure what the government should be doing for the single mom, other than perhaps having made birth control more widely available, which we'll talk about at some point anyway. But yeah, I think from a libertarian point of view, as opposed to an anarcho-capitalist point of view, it's worth thinking about what is the bare minimum that government should be doing to make sure that virtually everyone in our society has the ability to participate in a productive, functional way.
Katherine, anarcho-capitalism was just a reference, so you go next.
So I think that not everything that's good is liberty. And I think that's an important distinction here. That distinction has been totally eradicated in the kind of casual conversation of our politics. Both sides, both major parties are continually claiming to be the party of freedom or liberty when they are doing directly opposite things, right? So we can see the danger of just using the word liberty very loosely. Unlike Nick, I think that negative liberty freedom from coercion is the kind of liberty that we should be centering, and that the single mom who's worried about affording healthcare should be of concern for our politics. But what's going on there is not liberty. There's plenty of other words that we can use to describe a good that we might want to pursue. We could say power, we could say capacity, we could say opportunity. And I think that you can have in your mind what is the lived experience in your polity without making everything about liberty itself. I think guarding the concept of liberty to mean largely freedom from government coercion helps clarify the conversation. And the one sort of practical upshoot of that distinction is that then libertarians, whom I include both Nick and myself in, can really more directly communicate about the ways that government is constantly screwing up trying to help that woman. And that is because there is not a straightforward path to maximizing liberty. It's instead a complicated muddle in which we are thinking about a bunch of trade-offs, but that is a second-order priority.
Peter, how do you answer this question?
I think Nick is right to reference Hayek here. Some sort of welfare subsidy, welfare program is not necessarily something I am against in theory, but those programs should be efficiently run. And in so many cases, they just are not. Those programs should also be targeted at the truly needy. And what we see with the entitlement state as we have it is that Medicare and Social Security go toward a cohort that is, on a relative basis, really quite wealthy compared to other people in the country. And you have to, when you have these programs, when you have these style of programs in place, you have to guard against expansion into the middle or even upper middle class. Biden has been pushing for subsidies and spending for health care, for student loans, for families making, in some cases, $300,000 a year. And just there's no definition of needy in which a family making $300,000 a year fits in. And so, we can talk about single moms and we can talk about that, but like the actual welfare state as it exists spends a huge amount of money badly, inefficiently on people who don't need it. And so, as libertarians and as limited government advocates, that is where I'm going to, that is where I think we need to be putting our effort.
I'll just make two banal observations. One is that if you look at American speechcraft and politics, for instance, reading State of the Union addresses from years gone by, you will notice that the word liberty, except, it's just liberty and justice for all, like thrown in pro forma or Statue of Liberty, but just like the word and the concept of liberty has not quite disappeared, but it has been reduced by a ton compared to what it used to be. There used to be in both parties a kind of constant teasing struggle and exploration of, and also obviously a political mining of this concept, the meaning of which it was presumed to be of importance to all Americans as kind of a baseline. Like we were part of this sort of experiment in liberty, conceived in liberty, right? I was noticing this when I was at Disneyland watching the words, the great moments in Abraham Lincoln. I was doing the Gettysburg Address and some other thing too, I think. But the whole conceived in liberty, this was what people were focused on, and they're just not. I find that interesting, and I blame, and this is where the real banality comes in, I blame the insurance company Liberty Mutual, because their jingle is so atrocious, and it's just literally liberty, 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 liberty. They've been doing this for 20 years.
Could you do that again, Matt? I'm sorry, I
want
didn't
Peter
hear
to
that.
do it because he'll do it slower.
Yeah.
It's horrific. No, but it is interesting. I look at liberty for a long time. I remember once John Stossel asked me on Fox Business Network, "What's the difference between liberty and freedom?" And I was like, I don't know. I'm stupid. And I still don't know, but I've been thinking of it more in terms of sailors on shore leave. They are at liberty. They can do what they want for a time. And that gets to Katherine's negative conception of it, that there's no one telling you what you cannot do for this little bit of time. You might not have a bunch of money in your pocket. You might have some codes of conduct, but at liberty is a good place to be at. And it is deserving of its own special consideration as something that is interwoven in the American experiment, and it's a beautiful thing, and isn't necessarily the answer to questions about public policy at all times, although maybe it should be invoked more because it helps us think about it more clearly. All right, enough of speechifying. Lightning round time. On July 13th, the FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration, approved the birth control pill, O-pill, to be sold over the counter. Libertarian badge unlocked. Seems like a pretty big deal. Katherine, you're a lady. Why don't you tell us, is that a big deal? And what does this, if anything, teach us about things?
It is a big deal. It highlights even further the absolute absurdity of, well, frankly, not just birth control pills being sold by prescription only, but so many other substances as well. The fact that we now have this quite absurd, extremely politicized sandwich situation where we have this low dose mini pill, right? I've been on this pill and it's terrifying, just to be clear. You have to take it exactly at the same time every day, or you are going to end up with a surprise baby. Other birth control pills, which have a mix of two different substances, this pill has only one. Other pills, there's a little bit of grace. And people who need birth control maybe don't always live perfectly stable lives where they can take their pill every day at exactly the same time. So we have this one, which is kind of like less effective, weak sauce, but also less controversial pill. And then we have Plan B, which is also available, which is, basically like the nuclear warhead of pills, right? But we have now this chunk in the middle that are not legal. That makes no sense. That makes absolutely no sense. And I hope that this is the thin end of the wedge. I hope this is the equivalent of, medical marijuana, and it kind of opens things up as people get more comfortable with the idea. But I am torn between genuinely celebrating a real victory here and being furious that it's being done in such an absurdly paternalistic way with a frankly subpar product that's not appropriate for lots of women's bodies or situations.
Peter, you're a critic of the FDA. What does it teach us?
The FDA doesn't make good decisions for people, and when we this actually is a good way about thinking about the listener question, which is yes, in theory, we might like to have welfare programs that help single mothers, for example. On the other hand, look at almost any decision, regulation, program, system put in place by federal overseers. Does it actually help a lot of people? Well, maybe kind of, sort of in some ways here and there, but also it's almost certainly long overdue, stupid in some way, badly designed, incredibly expensive, incredibly inefficient. And this is why we should try to do almost all of these things to the extent we want to do them. We should try to find ways to do them without the federal government involved.
Nick, watershed moment for you?
It's a sad day when the FDA catches up to what Bobby Jindal, the ultra-Catholic former governor of Louisiana, was editorializing in favor of more than 10 years ago in the Wall Street Journal. The FDA is one of the worst agencies in the federal bureaucracy, and that's one of the things. When it goes, we will know we're approaching a libertarian paradise where individuals are freer to actually choose how they want to live and what drugs they want to put in their body for whatever reason. Hopefully this is the beginning of the end, but I really doubt this is the Jenga board that gets pulled out of the FDA.
This is also, I think, a great example.
Faster, please.
This is also a great example of, the way that you can kind of have unintended consequences when you do incremental legalization or liberalization. So a bunch of people are going to go on this pill because it's easy to get and over the counter. It's going to be less effective for some of those people. That, in turn, is going to create the impression that maybe birth control pills are not super effective. Actually, lots of birth control pills are incredibly effective, but maybe not this one for everyone. I can see that ricocheting around the way that women think and talk about contraceptive health in a whole bunch of ways. And, if you happen to live in a state where abortion is now illegal or more illegal, you could end up in a tight spot, courtesy of the piecemeal legalization of over-the-counter sales and the politicized reduction of abortion access. Don't want that for women.
Seems like a good time also, given that Katherine brought it up, the overwhelming success of Plan B being available over the counter, or sometimes technically behind the counter, but every drug and every toothbrush and toothpaste and deodorant stick in every drugstore is now behind the counter effectively, because you got to ask somebody to get it off the shelf for you in most cities. But Plan B is the thing that we should, that's the green light at the end of the dock that we should be running towards. People are pretty good at, figuring out what drugs are good for them and what aren't. If you got rid of all the money and the time and everything wasted in the regulatory apparatus in that, and left a small pool of money for people who have problems with drugs, once they're all available and they're all free, we'd be in a much, much better place.
All right, let's go to our end of podcast, what we have been consuming in the cultural spaces. Peter, why don't you lead us off?
I watched Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning
Cool.
Part 1. It's a pretty great movie, and very specifically, it's a great movie about Tom Cruise running. I don't know if you guys have seen the supercut of Tom Cruise running for like 10 minutes throughout the Mission Impossible movies, but like in this movie, he runs through the desert. He runs at one point on top of an airport, I think just kind of to nowhere. Like the scene just ends with him running on an airport roof, and that's okay, great. He runs through darkened European streets in evocative shadows, and he runs and he runs and he runs for his life. And at the very end of the movie, he drives a motorcycle off of a mountain ramp, allows the motorcycle to drop down into the ravine below him and parachutes down to the bottom. And the thing is, folks, he did that in real life. He actually just drove a motorcycle off a mountain and then parachuted, and you get to see it. And there's this like GoPro footage of Tom Cruise like trying to act while he's like falling from the mountain with a parachute above him. And it's just fantastic. Tom Cruise puts his life on the line for our entertainment for the sake of big screen awe and awesomeness. And there is an almost Harry Houdini-like showmanship here in which you're like, okay, this is going to be entertaining, and also he might die. There's also just this like great cinematic sort of history to this, right? The movie started, the franchise started in the 90s with a movie directed by Brian De Palma, who of course was like a big Hitchcock ripoff artist throughout the 1980s. And this movie continues that in some ways. It has a very Hitchcockian sensibility to its mood and tone and to some of the gags. But there's also just this madcap elaborateness to it, right? It's just there's just so much sort of clockwork silliness. There's an almost Buster Keaton energy to it that is just great. Movie nerds sometimes talk about pure cinema, this sort of post-verbal, highly visual sensibility that you get in movies that are not really about what people are saying. It's not about psychology. It's just about stuff happening and the camera catching that. And that is what this is. It's pure cinema. The plot is totally nonsense. Something about an all-powerful AI. It's called the Entity, and it's something, I don't know. But it doesn't matter. Totally doesn't matter, because Tom Cruise runs, and this is a movie about giant-sized spectacle for its own sake. Kind of loved it. Go see Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning, Part 1.
I hesitate to introduce another conspiracy theory into the current political climate, but there's no fucking way that Tom Cruise is actually doing these stunts.
Oh, Nick.
Right?
Oh, sweet summer child.
Did you want this podcast to last another 45 minutes?
There is a way.
Yes, he does.
There is a way he's doing them. And
there is no fucking way, unless Xenu is really, watching out for him. I just find that unbelievable. Of course, it looks real because it's a movie.
That's what's great, is that it kind of is unbelievable, and yet it did happen.
I'm a Tom Cruise denialist.
I hesitate to have Nick talk more. So, Katherine, why don't you go next?
I hope you can ask RFK about that next time you see him.
Yeah, it's good.
Oh, I will.
My recommendation is I just retrieved my daughter from 3 weeks of sleepaway camp, and while she was gone, I had very, very little contact with her. They were allowed to write paper letters, and that was it. But they did occasionally post photos on the camp's app. And my recommendation is about how sometimes AI is good, because the app is called Companion. And you are, if you want to, you don't have to, you can upload a photo of your child at the beginning of the summer. And then every time a photo of your child is posted in the 400 photo dump, the app just tells you. So you do not have to, if you are, for instance, a little bit sad that your child is away from you and looking for evidence that they are alive and not miserable, look through 400 badly taken photos of a bunch of girls in canoes. The app finds it for you. And I think sometimes, we get a little concerned about the uses of AI, and in particular, facial recognition AI, right? We are nervous about the idea of the cops sorting us out from a crowd and accusing us of all manner of things. And that is a correct thing to be nervous about. Reasons Ron Bailey has written a lot of good stuff about it. But sometimes AI is good, and this is one of those times.
I like how our recommendations here start with a movie about how AI is a powerful villain.
This is Tom Cruise's analysis is not right here. My analysis is right, which is that it's pretty cool that this app can just find your kid and be like, look, here she is. She's in a canoe and she's happy. So facial recognition. That's my tip for the week.
Nick, it's not too late to shift your recommendation to the movie AI from Steven Spielberg.
No, I don't want to add another conspiracy theory to this political season, but I suspect that Catherine's daughter is not at sleepaway camp.
She does her own stunts, Nick. I swear to God.
Okay.
I saw her myself using the AI recognition, just ride a motorcycle off a cliff and then parachute. She did a great job. Yeah, I refuse your conspiracy theory.
All right. Well, I watched the first season of Minx, which was a show that was originally on HBO Max, and the second season is now out, or I guess just Max now, or maybe down to Axe by this point. But the second season is coming out on Starz, which I have to remember to kill my 7-day free trial on Amazon. So I'd get charged $1,000 to watch the second season, which starts at the end of this week. Minx is a period piece set at a porno. It's the equivalent of Playgirl magazine coming out in the early 70s with a high-minded feminist magazine, and the editor, the creator of it, has to work with a porn publisher in order to bring out her magazine. It's a really good early 70s piece. It's a really good evocative and interesting exploration of all of the tensions in the early feminist movement, plus freedom of expression. And it's well acted, got a killer soundtrack. And it is a bunch of issues that are very alive right now. That question between, kind of identity politics, and I think in the case of the early women's liberation movement, in the most positive sense possible, of pushing for expanded rights and autonomy among women, who at the beginning of the 70s, single women could not even get a birth control prescription legally. And freedom of expression. Both of these things are seen as colliding now more. So I highly recommend the Minx, and you can watch it for free, the first season on Amazon Prime, and you can sign up for Starz, which is like $5 a month.
So last week, because Milan Kundera died, I reread for the first time in ages his most famous and just breakout success. There's no way to over describe how popular this book was in the 1980s. The Unbearable Lightness of Being, his 1984 book about a brain surgeon in Prague around 1968 and his wife and his lovers. And then their lives are kind of disrupted by the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia, and they leave, then they come back, and there's a lot of hijinks and just a lot of sex. I reread it in part to inform a piece I wrote for Reason on Friday about Kundera's long feud with Václav Havel, but also because I never liked it that much the first time around. And I wanted to see what my older eyes thought of it. I didn't like it when I first read it because I found it to be overly interested in sex as the answer to all the questions in the world, which seemed to me a bit of a stretch. And then after living in Prague and discovering with some alarm that the people who I gravitated towards, who had been very active in the Velvet Revolution, didn't like him too much. They had a lot of things to say about him negatively, and so I kind of saw him through those ungenerous eyes. Rereading it was an interesting exercise. It is a great novel. He is without question, I think, one of the great kind of late 20th century novelists, and when you read it with more generous approach, one of the reasons I didn't like it at first is because the narrator, you're supposed to see him as at least a somewhat of an autobiographical stand-in, or the protagonist, I should say, not the narrator. It was just kind of a creep. Didn't like him. Didn't like where he was coming from. And if you read it with more generous eyes, you are more open to the possibility that, Kundera knew that and was using that in various ways to kind of reflect and refract the horrible choices that are imposed upon you by a totalitarian regime. It's very interesting. I recommend it highly. I haven't rewatched the movie since way back when, although it had quite an impression on my young eyes. But it's an essential part of understanding late 20th century history, and it's achievements on its own right. And one of the achievements that my friends in Prague undercounted was that this was the introduction of so many people around my age of how bad the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia was in Prague in 1968. It was just, that's where they learned about it. And Kundera's work in general popularized that and argued for a unique Central European identity, a Czech identity, and its place in modern 20th century literature and art. in ways that's powerful and deserves more respect than probably it has gotten from Czechs themselves, although he has a very, very tortured relationship with a home country that he ended up permanently alienated from, which is, I think, a great sadness, but kind of inevitable. So the unbearable lights of
I
being.
thought if I may say, Matt, your essay about Kundera and his feud with Havel is just fantastic. And it really, I think it captured, an entire dimension to, the twilight struggle of the 20th century that we've already mostly started to forget. Which, of course, is in keeping very much with Kundera's work.
Exactly. All right. That's all the time we have for on this Reason Roundtable podcast. Look at all of our podcasts at reason.com/podcast, including the Reason interview with Matt Gillespie and the Soho Forum series with Dr. Gene Epstein. Nick, is there anything in New York that you would like to hype coming forward, or are you going to take a well-deserved rest?
We've got a Soho Forum debate coming up towards the end of July, which I highly recommend. It's about immigration and open borders. So it's a great topic. It's a great area to be debating it in. New York City, a city of immigrants, if there ever was one. And I want to say at Freedom Fest, we interviewed Mike Rowe. We interviewed Doug Stanhope, the great comedian, who has a fixation on me, which we'll get into a little bit. In a kind of disturbing, but, kind of flattering way. And we also talked to Matt Taibbi. So we've got some real A+ content coming out of there that will roll out over the next few weeks at Reason.com.
Awesome. If you like what we do at the Reason Foundation, which makes this podcast possible, please consider donating to us, Reason.com/donate. All right. We'll see you next week.